Jamie, thank you. Now it's time for the Formula One. Jack Nicholls and the team are here ahead of this weekend's Azerbaijan Grand Prix and the first sprint race of the season.
Thanks, Aaron. Well, it feels like it's been a long, long time since we've had some Formula One content on the radio. Not because we haven't really been bothering, but because there hasn't been a Formula One race since the 2nd of April. That was the last time, the Australian Grand Prix, and Max Verstappen won it, and he leads the championship by 15 points. But this weekend is the Azerbaijan Grand Prix in Baku. Alongside me to discuss the goings-on today, and to be honest, over a very busy last 4 weeks, is the BBC's chief F1 writer, Andrew Benson, and the Times' motor racing correspondent, Rebecca Clancy. It's been a long break, Andrew, and a lot of stuff going on sort of all the time.
That's right. There's been team shuffles and all sorts of things going on, which we'll get into in the course of the podcast. But it's nice to be back racing again for everybody in Formula One. I could hear from the drivers yesterday that they'd, although they'd enjoyed a break, most of them were just desperate to get back in the cars.
Yeah, exactly. And they've got a lot of driving to do this weekend, Rebecca, because it's a brand new format this weekend.
Yeah, very exciting. Less practice, more racing. So we have the new format of the sprint. So we had Friday afternoon, we've had qualifying. So the preview is actually coming to you after qualifying. And then on Saturday morning, we have the sprint shootout, the first ever, which means very unusually, the drivers are climbing out of their car on Friday afternoon after qualifying and then climbing back in for qualifying on Saturday morning. And then the sprint race, as it were, a third of the race distance on Saturday afternoon. And then the big Grand Prix on Sunday.
Andrew, what happened to the good old days of you qualify, then you have a race? Why is it all going mixed up?
Well, they're trying to introduce something exciting every day. They're trying to, they're responding to the new audience that Formula One has attracted in the last few years, partly because of the Drive to Survive series on Netflix, partly for social media. Audience has expanded. The demographic has changed, and so Liberty Media, who own Formula One, they want to benefit from that and keep growing the sport. So they didn't want to just keep with the same old, if you like. And I think there's a feeling that 2 Friday practices can drag a bit, and then there's another practice session on Saturday morning before you get into qualifying. If you change the weekend in the way that they have done, well, they first started doing it in 2021. When the sprint was first introduced, they've been tinkering with it a little bit here and there. This is quite a significant change, but I think everybody in Formula One feels that it's a change in the right direction for a sprint weekend. The question, of course, is, it's an existential one about the sort of overall format of the weekend. I think most people in Formula One, the drivers, most of them are quite positive about the sprint, apart from Max Verstappen. Particularly, they don't mind it shifting things up a bit every now and again, but they don't really want it every weekend. But the problem is that Formula One is going in that direction, and it does feel like there are going to be more and more sprints, and then it becomes a question of what is Formula One going to be in the more medium-term future, and I don't think we know the answer to that yet.
Well, Max Verstappen is definitely not happy about it, and he was talking on press day on Thursday about how he's looking at the end of his career because it's all just taking its toll, even though the money is nice, the life is nice. The racing is lovely. It's a lot. We were supposed to have 24 races this year. We've got 23 because China's obviously not happening. It is an exhausting calendar. And I know you're never allowed to moan about working in Formula One, and we are very fortunate in the positions that we're in. But it is a lot, and the sprint races do add an extra bit of jeopardy, and they've introduced this qualifying because they didn't think that drivers are pushing hard enough during the sprint race because they were afraid that what happened on Saturday would affect their Sunday race. So they've tried to eliminate that, which is good, and I am definitely in the camp of less practice, more racing. I'm going to be accused of working for Formula One, but I do think that every single track day should mean something, and I think you will get fans through the door. There is a new audience. And attention spans are shorter. They just are these days.
Let's do more things.
No, but but that's why you introduce shorter races. That's the point. That's the premise of introducing a third length, isn't it? Because that's people tune in for that. That you can get snips of that on YouTube or wherever you get your highlights from. Maybe not this podcast at this rate. But I really like it. I really like that they're trying something, purists I know won't agree with it, but I think it's very good to be trialing these things. Introduced in 21, they've admitted that it didn't quite work. Nobody, and I'm definitely in this camp, nobody liked the fact that qualifying sent set the grid for the sprint set the grid for Sunday. That had to go. Very good that they've done that. I like that F1 is exploring these things. I like that they admit when they're wrong, and so they mix things up a bit. So I'm all for it.
The one thing that I feel sometimes we're kind of overlooking is that it's a new format to interest the fat. It's just about more eyeballs, isn't it? Which means more money. That's kind of what it comes down to. Not in terms of growing the fan base, in terms of, but if you get, you know, if you have a meaningful session in the race and that's what everyone watches, but if you make people now have to watch 4 things, then that brings your metrics up. It brings the amount sponsors can charge more up. It means what you can charge for TV rights up. And it just means more eyeballs. It means bigger hits on YouTube because there's 4 things now you got to watch over the course of the weekend instead of 2. That's what it's about.
But you don't have to watch all 4. That's the point. That Friday sets the grid for Sunday and Saturday is a standalone. What happens on Saturday stays on Saturday. So you don't actually have to watch all the 4 sessions. Yes, okay, the points that they earn on Saturday go towards their final race tally, and perhaps it could determine the championship. I doubt it. But they don't have to. And Liberty Media did this deal with Netflix. They produced this documentary. It has been a huge, huge hit. It has brought in a very different demographic. They think it's younger. They think their attention spans are shorter. They want it short. They want it snappy.
But hang on, they've got into Formula One.
Yeah, but then
so why change it?
Because who walks into Formula One and says, do you know what I really, really want to watch? I want to watch 3 hours of cars going around and commentators saying, okay, so Max Verstappen's gone fastest, but we don't know the engine settings and we don't know the fuel loads. Nobody wants to watch that. You have to make it more exciting. You have to make track time count.
Why do you need... No, you have... Now you're making... Who wants to watch Formula One every single day of the weekend? And there's 4 sessions you got to watch. The Grand Prix on Sunday's 2 hours. You got to watch an hour on the Saturday. Like, obviously, I love it, but I don't quite understand to me, it just feels quite cynical, basically. That's all it's about, is getting more eyeballs. It's not about playing with new formats to do this. It's to have more things that count on a weekend so that more people will come to the track, more money is made for Formula One. That's what it comes down to. It's not some heroic thing for the young people.
No, and I'm not so cynical as to suggest it is. Can I just finish the point, though? Because I like what they're doing. What I don't like is that I have to watch it and potentially have to watch it 24 times a year. That's the big problem here.
Yeah.
Which is also the point Verstappen is making, actually. And he's saying it's overkill, effectively. That's essentially the point. Too much of a good thing. 24 race weekends a year, and they're 4 days long. You know, he's saying, okay, have 24 race weekends a year, but make them 2 days long. But that's not going to happen because of the money thing. And just to come on the money thing, it's not mutually exclusive that it can be about the audience and about the money, because one follows the other.
Correct.
So,
but it doesn't have to be new. But what I'm saying is, yeah, you're transferring an existing audience into making them watching more things.
But also, I mean, I think they're trying to find a happy medium, right? They're trying to say, we respect the history of Formula One. We respect that, you know, a Grand Prix is an event that has an ebb and a flow and a strategy, and it takes its time to evolve, and that's what makes it grand, if you like, you know. And it is what makes it great, you know. And I think there's a fear, or there could have been 5 or 6 years ago when an American media company came in and took over the sport, that that would be removed in a way, and that you would reduce a Grand Prix to like an NFL match, for example, where an hour's worth of sport lasts for 4 hours because there's an advert break every 5 minutes, and it's all staccato, and and it would lose all of that. They haven't done that. They've kept the essence of Formula One. A Grand Prix is still a Grand Prix, and all of us who love Grand Prix for what they are and what they were and what it's created, and the cachet and the style and the danger and everything that comes from Formula One, everything that makes it so appealing, it's still there. What they're doing is kind of fiddling around the edges to make other bits of the show a bit more appealing for other people who hopefully will then get gripped by the wider sport and watch this other thing and really then get into it more and more depth and so on. So actually, is it really something worth complaining about, Jack? You know, they've kept what is great about Formula One, and they've done some other stuff as well.
Would you be happier if they did the standalone sprint day on the Friday and kept qualifying on the Saturday? Because Andrew touched on it there. I think the ebb and flow of the weekend is being disrupted by the sprint. I think it's very confusing on the Sunday to then think back to the Friday evening. And I think they would have been better off doing sprint standalone on the Friday and have kept quali on the Saturday.
They may do that. I think they may well not, though, because obviously the bigger audience is going to be on the Saturday for TV. And
I don't know how you fit in practice either. Then It gets a bit convoluted. Yeah. But I think that would potentially satisfy the purists more.
Oh, look, I'm not sort of. I know I sound like I'm suddenly against the sprint. I found
you sound like the oldest person in the room, not the youngest.
Yeah, yeah, true. But I think that it's like the sprint. Initially, the plan was we're still yet to see whether the sprints are actually. Most sprints have not been good. Nothing has happened in them, so that still exists. And I don't understand that theory of let's get the young people to watch this sprint race and then maybe they'll watch the longer one. Well, why would they watch the shorter one if they don't already watch the longer one? Don't understand that logic, but fine. And then the shorter one's going to be boring because there's no pit strategy, there's no overtaking. So yes, there was one in Brazil that was great, but that's because Hamilton had a grid penalty and was coming from the back. It's now not mixing up the grid for Sunday, which was when we got the good sprint weekends before, was because something would happen in the sprint and then the grid would be mixed up. And that was the whole reason. Sprints were brought in to mix up the grid for Sunday. That was one of the big reasons. And now that's not a thing. So my point is just why, other than more eyeballs, more money? And that's it. And it's fine that that's the case.
They are running a business, so you can't really say that. So
you're happy that Formula One's run as a business?
But you talk about money like it's a bad thing. All of the money that Liberty are making, that goes into the pot that all the teams are receiving, which is why they are unanimously voting through all of these decisions. Yeah, but the changes to the sprint race only got made on Wednesday. It's happening on Saturday. So they are all benefiting from what is happening. As far as Liberty Media are concerned, as it stands at the current valuation of Formula One, they've trebled their money. So they're the ones laughing.
I don't care. I'm here for sport. Isn't that what we're all here for? And we're like, oh no, money's... Imagine having this, if we were having this argument on like the, the Monday Night Club or something, and everyone's like, oh no, it's fine with the amount of money in the Premier League. It's great. Everyone gets richer.
But Jack, sport doesn't stand still, okay? A long time ago, Grand Prix was 4 hours long.
1958, they felt that all the young people's attention spans were getting shorter. Yeah. So they shortened the races to the current limit of 2 hours or 290 kilometres?
Exactly.
300
There used to be 2 qualifying sessions, then there were 1. They changed the qualifying format. They introduced pit stops. They banned pit stops.
But the race happens on a Sunday, and that's what happens. Yeah. That's my issue, is that suddenly, he won the Grand Prix, but he won the sprint. They won it. They're on pole for that. Anybody took qualifying for here.
Jack, by making the sprint separate... You could argue they've kept the purity. They've made it more pure than what they had before, because you've still got a qualifying session that sets the grid for a Grand Prix. Then there's a bit of showbiz in the middle where they do something else, a shorter race and a shorter qualifying session. But it's not actually affecting in any way your qualifying and your race that you love so much and what got you into this when you were 9 years old or however old you were when you started.
6.
So actually, you could argue that you should be applauding Liberty for what they're doing this year, because they've gone back more towards what you would have liked.
And you can talk about the money and say that that's okay that they're making money while enjoying the sport, because the money only comes if they're improving the sport, if it's perceived that they're improving the sport, which from the millions and millions of extra fans that are coming towards it, they would agree that is what is happening.
There are lots of questions about a sport and what they're doing and whether they're the right decisions. And a lot of them were raised in Australia 4 weeks ago, for example, with all the red flags, the race stoppages. Were those made for the right reasons, and the chaos at the end? And I saw a lot of people on social media saying, it's all to do with Liberty Media. All they want is, showbiz and all the rest of it. These are legitimate accusations that you can level at some of these decisions. But I think in this particular instance, it's harder to criticise, because it's, as I said before, it's not actually affecting the thing that you love so much.
No, and I take that point, but it just means that but it just means there's other stuff in it that complicates it, and I don't know why I have a issue with that, honestly. I don't know, but
ultimately it doesn't matter whether you do, because it's not about you, is it?
Does it matter if Max Verstappen has an issue with it? Does it matter? Because he does.
It matters more.
Yeah, fair.
But it seems that Lewis Hamilton, Charles Leclerc, Fernando Alonso and everybody else don't have so much of an issue with it. So, at the end of the day, Max Verstappen, amazing though he is, he's just another Formula One driver. And if he decides to pack it in, because he doesn't want to do 24, 25, whatever it is by then, 4-day race weekends a year, then fine, he can go away and someone else can have his job, can't they?
That's what Verstappen was saying in the press conference yesterday, that basically now there's 25 or there's 23 this year, but it'll be up to 25 before you know it, races in a season. Plus, what if there's 10 sprints at all of those? You're ending up with a 30 race Formula One season. And he said he would, not be interested. Do we see Max Verstappen walking away at the end of his contract back?
I wouldn't put it past him. He's the sort of person who I could imagine saying, yeah, do you know what, I've had enough. And his contract ends at the end of 2028, so he's got plenty of time. He's not going anywhere anytime soon. He'll have quite a few championships under his belt by then, I'm sure. I get the feeling he's actually one of those drivers who says that when he's saying, I don't care about the tally, I don't care about the 7 or the 8, I actually believe him. And he's talking about he wants to set up his own race car. He wants to race in Le Mans with his dad. I actually could see him just saying, do you know what? I have had enough. But there's always a world champion waiting behind him to come in. So I don't, it's a transient sport, right? In the sense of world champions come and go and retire and come back and, to go round and round in circles. There will always be another world champion. There will always be the next best thing. So you always have those moments where you think, oh my goodness, Michael Schumacher stepped away from the sport and then he obviously came back again and stepped away again. And then Lewis Hamilton, his day is nearing. And it happens. Fernando Alonso retired and everyone thought that the sport would implode, and Max Verstappen one day will leave the sport, and do you know what? Formula One will continue and it will be okay. So he may well. I do actually believe him that he's probably looking at life after 2028. Although, quite frankly, who is looking at 2028? And, it's grueling for all of us. The drivers get paid 40 million odd euro a year. Well, some of them, not all of them, obviously. We don't, I just have to say. It is tough. It is tough being away. You turn on your TV, you listen to the radio, and you get Thursday media day, Friday, Saturday, Sunday track action. But for a lot of us, and including the drivers, although they've got private jets, you're in on Wednesday, you're home on Monday. Sometimes that means you're actually landing on Tuesday. It's an enormous, enormous commitment, which is only getting bigger as this calendar expands. And so I wouldn't be surprised if other drivers suddenly think, do you know what? I've made a lot of money. It's time to step away. I've got a family. I want to see my kids grow up. I want to do other things. From this sport, you're retiring at 30 odd, or from any elite sport, you retire in your early 30s. You're a long time retired. So you want to make sure you've banked your money and invested it well. But it's possible because you have to put yourself first. It comes above everything else. Your own health, your own mental health, your own physical health, your family. It's your priorities. And there's absolutely no reason why, if Liberty are going to push all of us to the extremes of our physical abilities to do our jobs with these calendars, why not walk away?
What did you make of it, Andrew?
I thought it was a very interesting and nuanced point that he made. He wasn't just going, I don't like sprint races, or I don't like this, or I don't like that. He was,
all right, point taken. I was being a bit nuanced, wasn't I?
He was saying, I'll quote, even if there won't be any more sprint races, if we keep expanding the calendar and the whole weekend is that long, at one point you question yourself, is it worth it? I do like racing, I do like winning. I know that, of course, there's the salary and everything, and you have a good life, but is it actually a good life? Now, who are we to say? He's the guy doing it. We don't. It is a tough life. It's also a great life. We're not driving racing cars every weekend to do it, but he acknowledged that people would say it was very weird, as he put it, to hear people like him saying that. But he, as Beck was saying, he feels like he's got other things to do in his life. He already has other ambitions, and it feels counterintuitive because this is a guy who does nothing but motor racing. He drives his Formula One car. He sometimes goes on sim racing in his hotel room in the evenings at Grand Prix. He certainly goes home to Monaco and does more sim racing there. He plays a bit of FIFA in between, and then when he's not doing the sim racing on the computer, he's going to Portimao or Barcelona or somewhere and driving a GT car because he just loves driving. But he's saying, I don't necessarily love the commitment that Formula One is demanding of me. And you have to respect the guy's opinion. I
think one of the most interesting things about that quote was that he had obviously and is obviously thinking about it. It wasn't a quote that suggested that he'd just come up with it on the fly in response to a question. He's clearly been having conversations about it. He's clearly been thinking about it a lot. He clearly, every January, looks at the calendar and thinks, have I got it in me? And it's a very interesting way to look at the double world champion, his mindset and what he's thinking.
I think you'd be surprised. I think more drivers than you would realise, or certainly more drivers than would admit it publicly, do get to a point where, in a Formula One season, where they've had enough. I had a chat with a Grand Prix driver in an airport lounge last autumn on the way to one of the Grand Prix, and he was saying, why are we doing this? 4 more races, the championship's over, what's the point? And I said, well, you get to race your Formula One car 4 more times. He goes, yeah, the racing, great.
Did you realise, surely you knew he wasn't asking quite that literally?
No,
why do we do this? Oh, you have to do the races?
No,
actually, mate.
But I was the point I was trying to make back was, well, you love the racing,
yeah.
And he was like, yeah, but everything else I can do without that. Thanks very much. So I don't think this is probably not a unique feeling among the drivers that it's all getting a bit much. They all feel the calendar's getting a bit much.
I had a similar conversation with, I'm guessing possibly not the same driver, on the way back from a doubleheader in a lounge, and he was shattered. And he wasn't particularly looking forward to the rest of the season. And he was very much looking forward to going home. And he was tired. He was just thinking, what are we fighting for? What's the end game here with this many races? And it's interesting because, they'll never say it publicly and we're never going to stitch them up. That's why we haven't named them. But it's tiring and it does take its toll.
Fascinating. It's fascinating stuff. And then, it's a big. We should do a special on this or something because we don't have time now. But to think,
feels like we already are.
Yeah, I know. But I just wonder how much that translates to other sports. A footballer's going, right, we're on the Thursday night Europa Conference game. Can't really be bothered with this one. I don't know. Does it exist in all sports? Maybe. I don't know. We will be back with more with Andrew Benson, the BBC's chief F1 writer, and Rebecca Clancy, the motor racing correspondent for The Times. In a few minutes' time, we will discuss qualifying that took place earlier on today, and we will look ahead of the actual racing action that we're going to have this weekend. But we're going to take a quick break. Aaron Paul.
Jack, thank you. Wow. Exciting times in Formula One. Exciting times in the championship. Playoff campaign. Back to the F1 and Jack Nicholls.
Cheers, Aaron. We'll be back with you at full time. But until then, we've got some more Formula One to discuss. Along with me is Andrew Benson, the BBC chief F1 writer, and Rebecca Clancy, the motorsport correspondent for The Times. Qualifying took place earlier on today. A pole position for Charles Leclerc in the Ferrari, ahead of Max Verstappen, who's the championship leader by 15 points, ahead of Sergio Perez in third spot. And, Beck, Charles Leclerc seemed pretty surprised to end up on pole position.
He was very surprised, yeah, stepping out of the car after claiming his third consecutive pole here. He had said that he was expecting to come in this weekend and be fighting with the likes of Mercedes and the Aston Martin. He was not expecting to be ahead of the Red Bull, who have been on pole for the first 3 races. So a bit of a surprise for him. However, not particularly a surprise for us, I would suggest, because he loves this track. He's incredibly fast around here. The Ferrari is extremely quick. Baku, we know, is a fast street circuit. It's very demanding. Leclerc has always gone well here. So he pulled out a sublime lap, I have to say. And actually on that provisional pole lap, when him and Max Verstappen had identical lap times, which was very bizarre. It doesn't happen very often. I'll let Jack and Benny go to this one. They got very excited about 97 European Grand Prix.
Oh man, that day in Jerez.
And
I was 7. Were you there, Benson?
Certainly was.
Oh.
Verstappen got provisional pole because he set the time first, but it wasn't a surprise to see Leclerc pull it out. He is absolutely brilliant. However, I'm not sure that's going to translate to Sunday. He did say, the Monegasque was saying that he doesn't expect them to be beating the Red Bulls. The Red Bull do have the faster car over the race pace. So sadly, I'm not entirely convinced this is the start of the Ferrari Leclerc challenge for the championship, but it is great to see somebody else on pole other than Red Bull.
Let's hear what he had to say.
Well, I mean, it's a really big surprise for me, for the whole team, I think, because coming here, we did not expect that. So it's amazing to be starting on pole for Sunday's race. We must not get carried away because we know that our weak point is more the race, where we seem to be behind the Red Bull. But it's a very big surprise for us to be on pole anyway.
You were hooked up for the whole lap as well, right on the limit as well, just so close to that wall in T1. I mean, it must have felt pretty amazing out there.
I really gave it all, and turn one I thought I would touch harder than that, but at the end I think I just brushed the wall, and was a really good turn one, and then from that corner onwards it was just getting faster, so really happy with the lap.
You say you mustn't get carried away, but do you feel that the gap to Red Bull has closed? Certainly over one lap pace it has. Is there any chance there in race pace that you may be able to get some advantage to?
I think the car is more together, so this is normally a good sign for the race, but if you look at the gap in the previous races in the race, I don't think we found that, so I believe it's going to be more difficulty with the race pace, but never say never, and if there's the opportunity to stay in front, I'll of course do absolutely everything to stay there.
Charles Leclerc there, speaking to Laura Winter, having taken pole position for the Azerbaijan Grand Prix on Sunday afternoon, which you can hear on 5 Live. Andrew Benson, 6 points this season for Charles Leclerc. Verstappen's got 69. The championship fight's not back on or anything, is it?
Of course it isn't. And Leclerc already this weekend has described his season so far as a disaster. But I think he's kind of made up for that. Not that was his fault to a large extent. He had a retirement from the first race when he was running third. That meant he had an engine grid penalty for the second race. So that affected him there. And then he crashed out on the first lap in Australia, which was a bit of a 50-50 racing incident with Lance Stroll getting pincered at turn 3. But that lap, I don't know, I wonder whether that's the lap of the season so far. He was asked whether it was his best ever qualifying lap, and he said, well, you always feel like when you're on a high after qualifying, you always want to say yes. And he remembered his 2021 pole in Azerbaijan, where actually his car was definitely much less competitive than it is this year, and he was still on pole. How on earth did he manage that? I still don't know. But it does look like it was a special lap, and even the Red Bull drivers were paying tribute to him afterwards. Sergio Perez called it a tremendous lap from Leclerc. So I think we've just seen something quite special from him. One of the reasons why some people wonder whether he is the quickest driver over one lap in Formula One.
Well, on that, he said in that interview, never say never about winning the Grand Prix tomorrow. Beck, would he say never about going to Mercedes?
Not yet.
So there was he was asked yesterday, where's this story come from? So there's this chat, there's this rumours, reports, whatever, that Toto Wolff and Charles Leclerc have been having some chats, and he was asked about it yesterday.
It comes from where all Ferrari stories come from, which is the Italian media, who say that Toto Wolff has called up Charles Leclerc and said, look, my man Lewis Hamilton is leaving us potentially this year when his contract ends, potentially in another year if he extends, and I want to know what you're doing. Charles Leclerc's contract ends next year at the end of 2024. He's obviously a very attractive option for Mercedes, but the question was put directly to him on Thursday in the press day, and he I wouldn't say dismissed it out of hand. The answer went something along the lines of, no, I know you're all smiling because you don't believe me. No, I haven't spoken to Toto. There haven't been any conversations, not yet. So he's obviously thinking about it. We know he's not 100% happy with Ferrari and where they are. Who can blame him? Year after year, the season starts with such promise, and then at the first race, it's over. So, yeah, it makes sense for Mercedes to have a contingency plan if, I would say, in the unlikely event Lewis Hamilton doesn't extend this year, I would expect that he will. I think Andrew agrees with me that he'll go at least another year. He's definitely in search of that 8th title. But it's interesting to hear the rumours doing the rounds because it makes sense. I'm not sure how it sits with Toto Wolff having Charles Leclerc and George Russell in the same team, though. I don't think he wants to return to the headache of 2016, although I'm sure he would if he has 2 drivers fighting for the championship, but more the headache of 2 drivers infighting, what that does to the team, the problems that causes. And actually, it's nice to have that problem, but you can only afford to have that problem if you are the standalone team at the front fighting for championships on your own. Mercedes aren't in that position yet, so they definitely can't afford to get themselves there.
So why don't they have that problem with Hamilton and Russell?
Because they're not fighting for the championship.
Right, but so next year the theory is they're fighting for the championship.
But they're not next year, are they?
Okay.
We know that Red Bull pretty much, I mean, not to
But my point being, when Mercedes hired Russell and Hamilton, they're very much sort of equal number ones, as it were. So they've made that decision to have
Mercedes don't do number
drivers.
1 drivers.
Yeah.
Apparently.
So look, this is a really interesting dynamic. So let's just park the Leclerc quotes first of all. It's very much a news story. He said, no, there have not been any conversations, not yet, not for the moment. Now, I see that as Charles Leclerc being Charles Leclerc. He's a very straightforward and direct character. You know, I don't think he's playing political games. I think he's just accepting the reality that, of course, he's going to have conversations with Mercedes. That's what happens in Formula One, right?
But he's saying it's untrue that he has already had.
He's saying he hasn't had so far, about a drive anyway. Of course, he's talked to Toto Wolff in the past. He knows who he is and all the rest. But the dynamic is that Hamilton's contract runs out this year. Leclerc's contract runs out at the end of next year. Hamilton is very open with Toto Wolff, and Toto Wolff's very open with Hamilton. They've been very clear to all of us in the media that there will be a new contract between Hamilton and Mercedes after this one. They haven't specified it's going to be for racing, but Hamilton's made it clear he wants to carry on racing. So I think we can be certain that Hamilton will extend his contract. The question is, for how long? Now, the 8th title, as Beck said, is incredibly important to Hamilton. He feels he was robbed of that 8th title in Abu Dhabi in 2021, and many people around the world agree with him. Not very many of them live in Milton Keynes on Bradbourne Drive, where Red Bull are based, but anyway. And they feel they owe him that 8th title. So I know people who...
Mercedes feel they owe
him that title. And they feel it's something that they are almost owed by fate, if you like. And they're going to try everything they can to get that for him. The problem that Hamilton has is I think he'll want to carry on in Formula One while he feels that 8th title is possible. But every year that he doesn't have a chance to win that 8th title feels really hard for him. And I think that's why he didn't have a great start to last year and hasn't had a great start so far to this year. This is the first race here in Baku where he's out-qualified George Russell so far this year. It hits hard when he realises he's not going to have a car that's going to allow him to compete for that 8th title. So yes, he does another contract, but what happens if Mercedes are still uncompetitive next year, as Beck suggests they probably will be? And I think, as most people think, they probably will be, because Red Bull are so far ahead at the moment. What impact does that have on Hamilton and how long he wants to stay in Formula One? Does he still want to race competing for 4th, 5th, 6th places with Fernando Alonso? Not that that's any disrespect to Fernando Alonso, but it's not what Hamilton wants, right? So this is where Leclerc comes in. Also, Hamilton's nearly 40. You know, he is going to stop sooner rather than later, and Wolff has to look to the future. And if you were going to look around the Formula One paddock, and Max Verstappen's under contract to Red Bull till the end of 2028, and you want a driver to replace Lewis Hamilton, of course Charles Leclerc is your number one option. You'd be an idiot if he wasn't. So that's why it's such a fascinating scenario. And of course Leclerc, from his side, he made it clear in his interview yesterday with the media that he's passionate about winning the championship for Ferrari. He loves Ferrari. He wants nothing more in the world than to win the world championship for Ferrari. But he's also not a fool. He didn't see what happened to Alonso, but he's aware of what happened when Alonso was at Ferrari, and they weren't good enough to take him to the title, and he lost faith in them in the end. There are other drivers through history where that's happened too. Leclerc is in danger of becoming a Gilles Villeneuve or a Fernando Alonso who doesn't win championships with Ferrari because they're not in a position to do it. They're not good enough. How long is his patience going to last? So, of course, it's going to be an interesting idea to potentially go to Mercedes. So you wrap all that together. That's why people like me and Beck and you, Jack, are talking about this so much, because it's so obviously a very real thing.
On the Hamilton point of him wanting another title, Mercedes have made steps to try and make that happen in the last few weeks as well, Beck.
They have. So very interestingly, they have had a bit of a reshuffle of their technical team. So James Allison is back into the day-to-day fray of things, and Mike Elliott has moved or shuffled around roles, and he is now apparently James Allison's boss in an inferior role, if you can work that one out.
That's like our producer. He's our boss, but he's in an inferior role. Like, I get it. I understand the dynamic.
Your words, Jack.
But they're actually producer Paddy's words. They're not mine. He probably said it to me.
But it's really good for Mercedes to have James Allison back in the position of actually being in charge of the technical aspect of that car, because the man's a genius. He is absolutely brilliant. It's like having your best player sat on the sidelines and you're fighting the relegation battle, and then you suddenly think, I've got a brilliant idea. I'm going to watch Ted Lasso and I'm going to bring in the best players and I'm going to change it all around. I love Ted Lasso, don't get me started. And
I don't think we did.
No, I know. My football reference for the day. And it's great that they've got him back in. It's clearly a response to comments that Lewis Hamilton made about how the team weren't listening to him about the design of the car and he wasn't happy with the direction that it was going in, even though they have made improvements from last year to this year. So it's a really big step that they've made and one that I think will be welcomed within the team. But just to go back to a point that Andrew was making about Mercedes and this contract, the question is, how long does Lewis Hamilton sign for? Because he's 38 now, he'll be 39 in January. Will it be a 1-year contract? Will it be a 2-year contract? Does it even matter? Because a lot of the talk in the paddock is that Red Bull will dominate. They're so far ahead now. And this is what I meant when I said I'm not wanting to put F1 fans off, but the regulations don't change until 2026. So even if Lewis Hamilton signs a 2-year contract, that takes him to the end of 2025. What then? He's on the cusp of perhaps Mercedes having solved all of the problems, and then does he retire at the end of 25 and then in 26, Charles Leclerc and George Russell are fighting for the title in the Mercedes. So he's in a really difficult position at the moment. Does he walk away now and just accept that he walked away years before his 8th ever came, or does he stick around? It's a really difficult one. Although Andrew and I were sort of chewing the fat over this one, shall we say, earlier. And actually, if Red Bull are going to continue to be dominant, and you can't throw away seasons just because Red Bull may potentially remain on top, but James Allison's role before it was changed in the last week was to look at 2026 and to look at the regulations and to look at how Mercedes can hit the ground running, as they did, as we've seen in 2014 when they came out firing on all cylinders.
Which wasn't James Allison.
James Allison, no, it wasn't. But they want to repeat the same thing in 26. James Allison was looking at that. He's now back in the day-to-day running. So have they sort of semi-shot themselves in the foot?
Yeah, short-sighted.
If you see what I mean. Just to keep their driver happy. So they're in a really difficult position at the moment. There isn't an easy answer because, as I said, you don't want your best player on the sidelines. You want him in. And I'm sure James Allison, knowing what he's like, he can probably dip into both pools, although that's a lot to ask of the man. But Mercedes find themselves in quite a difficult position now.
Who designed the Mercedes F1 car last year? The worst Mercedes F1 car they've ever designed?
So there was a transition period through 2021 where Allison was slowly stepping backwards and Mike Elliott was slowly coming forwards. And that transition period was completed by July in 2021. So you can't absolve James Allison of all blame for what happened with the 2022 car. But it's certainly true because they would have been working on that for quite some time. So he was certainly part of that. So that's the answer to your question. This is a slightly odd situation, the way it's been painted. It's slightly odd the way it was communicated to the public. There was no press release that came out. It just was slipped by Toto Wolff into an interview. It also, the explanation of it doesn't make a lot of sense to someone looking in from the outside. Mike Elliott's basically, what we're being told is that Mike Elliott, who was the technical director, had been looking at the company and how things were working, and he came to the conclusion that he wasn't the right guy to be technical director, and James Allison was. So he suggested, they say, that Allison came back to the role that he previously had, and that he, Elliott, became chief technical officer, which was the role that Allison had. But, they say, when Allison was CTO, he wasn't Mike Elliott's boss as technical director, but now that Allison is technical director again, because Elliott wasn't doing a good enough job, Elliott is now his boss, now he's CTO. Now, I don't understand that, but Mercedes say that's the best way forward. So whether it's, I've spoken to other people in Formula 1 who don't believe that Elliott is actually going to be James Allison's boss in any other way other than titular, but there you are. That's what they've done. And I think the one thing we can all agree on is that it's a good idea to have James Allison back as technical director.
Sounds like a bit of ego massaging going on, perhaps.
You said that. I couldn't possibly comment.
Well, after that complicated explanation of who's whom's boss, a reminder that there's a new format this weekend where qualifying takes place on both Friday and Saturday. One for a race on Saturday, one for a race on Sunday. What is this sport? Why is everything so difficult to explain? No, but we had qualifying earlier on today for the Grand Prix on Sunday. And I guess Leclerc on pole position, Verstappen alongside him, Sergio Perez third, Carlos Sainz fourth, Hamilton would be fifth on the grid ahead of Alonso, Norris, Tsunoda, Stroll and Piastri the rest of the top 10. Mercedes' struggles were compounded when George Russell missed out on the final pass of qualifying, so he's only 11th on the grid. And I guess we'll find out, Andrew, a lot of what we will see in the race in the sprint tomorrow, because we could have a different grid, well, we will have a different grid for the sprint on Saturday, but the inherent characteristics of tyres and tyre wear and tyre life and race pace will remain. So we'll know a lot more after the. Is that something the sprint could maybe do as well, as just tell us what's going to happen in the Grand Prix?
Basically, although I'm not sure we need the sprint to tell us what's going to happen in the Grand Prix, to be honest with you.
All we need is Andrew Benson.
I'm pretty sure. I mean, the Red Bull has such a strong straight line speed advantage, especially with DRS open. I can't, and Ferrari have really been struggling this year with tyre degradation in races. I can't see anything other happening than Max Verstappen blasting past Charles Leclerc at the earliest opportunity and going on to win the Grand Prix, I'm afraid. And I think the question then becomes, can Leclerc starting on pole and Sainz starting fourth, can they hold off the likes of Hamilton and Alonso start together on the third row?
Right, well, that's all we've got time for here. We will be bringing you the race coverage over the course of the weekend. Race gets underway at noon on Sunday, which you can hear on 5 Live. There is actually one big story, actually, that we just need to touch on quickly. Fernando Alonso, Andrew. all the questions to him were about Taylor Swift.
Well, there were some questions to him about Taylor Swift.
Why were there questions to Fernando Alonso about Taylor Swift?
Because it emerged in the Spanish media, as you know, Jack, because you sent me a message about it a few days ago.
Yeah, but it's my job to ask the questions.
The theory is that Fernando Alonso and Taylor Swift could be dating. Now, it seems, it has to be said, based on spurious evidence, and it's all to do with some theory that they've both recently broken up with their former partners, and Taylor Swift's 33 and Fernando Alonso is going for his 33rd victory. And that doesn't sound like evidence for a relationship to me, but I don't know whether it's true or not. But anyway, the internet went mad for it. And earlier this week, Alonso did a very amusing post on TikTok where he's sitting in a chair listening to a speeded up version of a Taylor Swift song called Karma, and he just looks up to the camera and winks, and that's the end of the clip.
I didn't see that.
Yeah,
I didn't see that bit.
Yeah, he's definitely playing up to it at the moment, and then he's been asked about it in all weekend.
Hang on, no. The best part is he's doing a Jolyon Palmer gag.
Yeah, exactly.
He's doing a Jolyon Palmer gag from when he was. I did not know that.
Yeah, the man's class at the moment, Jack. You've got to give him that. Come on, he's been.
Have people pointed out that when Taylor Swift released her 4th studio album, Red, Alonso was driving for Ferrari?
They have pointed that out.
Have they?
And there's been all sorts of memes about Alonso and Taylor Swift walking down the paddock, and what would that look like? Because she's very tall, isn't she?
Yeah.
And he's not tall. So, yeah, it's been a highly amusing diversion for the last few days. And he was asked about it yesterday, and he says, I'm not commenting.
And Andrew doesn't think it's true, because Andrew, who knows Fernando Alonso's diary inside out, can't work out when they would have met. So doesn't think it's really
because
happening.
She's on her Eras tour.
I think what's so interesting about it is that it's one of those things where you just think about it and you think, no, that can't be true. And then you think, but you know what?
But also, why is I'm actually interested why this has caused like such a kerfuffle. Is it because we don't get this stuff anymore in F1? I don't know, like F1 dates, people dating celebrities isn't really a thing. Why has everyone got so excited about it?
Because racing drivers these days, they race, they go back to the hotel room, they go on their sim, they go home, they go on their sim, then they get to a racetrack, and then they race, and then they hire out Estoril, and they go racing GT cars, and then they do it all over again. And there's never anyone dating anyone interesting. It's interesting. It's like the good old days.
Good old
If
days.
it's true. But what we need, we've obviously got Miami coming up. So when the talent list comes out, if Taylor Swift is on it,
Just imagine, yeah.
I don't think she will, but she's on the Eras tour.
Andrew won't be very happy.
Anyway, right, that is all we have time for now. We'll keep you up to date with any of the development. I doubt we. Well, we might. I don't know. I've got no idea. I was against even talking about this, but producer Paddy wanted it in. He thought it'd be a nice, light-hearted way to end the show. Has it been a success?
I think so. I think we could keep talking about it if you wanted.
Yeah, exactly. Aaron Paul does not want us to keep talking about it.
I feel like there's more love for this subject than sprint races.
Yeah, exactly. We've done Taylor Swift and Fernando Alonso, the 10-minute version. By the sounds of it, that's a Taylor Swift joke.
Is that the fifth album?
No, All Too Well. She did this song called All Too Well, and then she, on her re-release, she did a 10-minute version of it. Anyway, it doesn't matter. Anyway, that is all we have got time for. The Grand Prix gets underway Sunday at noon. We've got sprint qualifying, the sprint shootout as it's called, on Saturday morning, and then Saturday afternoon will be the sprint race, and then the Grand Prix itself on Sunday. So make sure you join us for commentary across the BBC Sport network. Now, I'm going to go listen to some Taylor Swift because it's in my head now. When is it not in my head? But now we're going to go back to Aaron Paul to bring some sanity back to the radio station.
Jack, absolutely fantastic stuff. Make sure you catch the podcast on BBC Sounds once again. I was really enjoying the Taylor Swift, Fernando Alonso chat. Let's head, though, to the bottom end.